What's going on, guys? It's your boy Distant Coder, and welcome back to another episode of Know Your Rulings. As usual, don't forget to leave your ruling questions in the comment section of this video, and I'll go over those for the ruling sections of the next video. Alright, well, without further ado, let's get into the rulings. Okay, so this first ruling question comes to us from Rick Harrison, and they ask the effect of Wolfrate, the Stellar Wind Wolf, to gain attack each time a monster effect is activated. Does it start a chain, or is it not an activated effect? So in the case of Wolfrate, the Stellar Wind Wolf, it gains 300 attack each time a monster effect is activated. In the TCG, it is not an activated effect. It's an effect that will simply gain 300 attack immediately after a monster effect resolves. So when a monster effect will resolve, the Wolfrate will gain 300 attack. It will not start a chain in order to gain those 300 attack points. Alright, this next ruling question comes to us from Jonathan, and they ask, how does the following chain resolve? Player A activates RedEyes Fusion, Player B chains Ash Blossom, and then Player A wishes to chain Psy-Frame Gear Gamma. So in this case, activating the Psy-Frame Gear Gamma in chain to the Ash Blossom is actually an illegal activation. The reason why is because RedEyes Fusion has the restriction that says that the turn you activate this card, you cannot normal or special summon monsters. Now, that restriction is treated as being applied the moment you activate RedEyes Fusion up until the point RedEyes Fusion has its activation negated. What this means is that when you activate the RedEyes Fusion, you are under that restriction. You're not allowed to activate any other cards or effects that would special summon a monster from wherever location because you can't summon anything. If the activation of RedEyes Fusion is negated, so for example by something like Solemn Judgment, after the activation of RedEyes Fusion is negated by the Solemn Judgment, you would be allowed to normal or special summon other monsters because the card isn't treated as activated. But when it comes to cards like RedEyes Fusion or any sort of like spells and traps, they are considered activated up until the point their activation is negated. So until the activation of RedEyes Fusion is negated, you are under the restrictions of RedEyes Fusion. So in this case, activating the Gamma in chain to the Ash Blossom is something that you would be doing while under the restriction of RedEyes Fusion. So chaining the Gamma to the Ash Blossom here is an illegal activation. Alright, this next ruling question comes to us from Exor Thornos, and they ask, Player A has an Antispell Fragrance active on the field. Player B activates a set impermanence in the same column of the anti-spell, negating its effects. Player A then sets Called by the Grave. Can Player A activate the set Called by the Grave on the opponent's turn? So in this situation, usually under Antispell Fragrance, when you set a card while the Antispell Fragrance is face up, you cannot activate it that turn, or during your opponent's turn, you need to wait for your following turn, even though it's a quick play spell. In the case where the Antispell Fragrance is being negated by a card effect, in this case by Infinite Impermanence, the effect of Antispell Fragrance needs to be active at the point in which you set the spell card from your hand for that spell card to be under the effects of Antispell Fragrance. So in the case where the Antispell Fragrance is negated by something and you set a spell while it's negated, it'll effectively act the same way as if the spell was set before the Antispell Fragrance was flipped face up. So as we know, if you set a spell and then Antispell Fragrance is flipped face up, those spells that are set before Antispell Fragrance was flipped face up are not under the effects of Antispell. In this case, because the Antispell was being negated, the spell that you set is also not going to be under the restriction of Antispell Fragrance. Alright, this next ruling question comes to us from Sanaj15, and they ask, if cards activate on the field regardless of where they end up on resolution, why can Pankratops' effect pop something like Skill Drain? So this is basically alluding to a ruling that I answered in my previous video where I said that if you had a spell that was being activated, your opponent chains Imperial Order, and then you droplet send that spell that was initially activated is still negated. Now, they're comparing this to something like Skill Drain with a monster that tributes itself for cost. The difference here is specifically because, yes, the Pankratops' effect still activates and resolves entirely on the field, but in this case, Skill Drain specifically reads that it will only negate the effects of monsters on the field while those monsters are face up on the field. So what this means is that if the monster leaves the field for whatever reason, that monster is no longer treated as negated by something like Skill Drain. If you were to compare this to something like Effect Veiler, say I have Pankratops on my field and my opponent uses Effect Veiler, and after that Effect Veiler has resolved, if I do use the effect of the Dino Wrestler Pankratops, that Pankratops will still be negated because Valor negates the effects on the field of the monster that it applied to, and in this case, the effect of the Pankratops is still resolving on the field, even though the card itself is in the graveyard. Alright, so this next ruling question comes to us from Mad Dog Tito, and they ask, "Hey Coder, I have a question. I've been getting back into the game as of late, and I still don't understand how certain cards can miss timing. How do cards miss their timing?" So this is a big one. It's one of those that returning players and beginner players don't really understand to the fullest extent, so I'll try to explain it as simply as I can for you guys. So effectively what missing the timing is, it's when a card has specifically a when effect that is optional. So something, for example, like Dupe Frog. Dupe Frog says when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can add one frog monster from your deck to your hand. It's only cards that have an optional when effect that can effectively miss the timing. What we mean when we say miss the timing is the card can miss its activation window even though it has met the requirements for it to be able to activate its optional when trigger effect. In the case of something like Dupe Frog, if you were to destroy Dupe Frog via the effect of something like Soul Taker, which says target a monster your opponent controls, destroy it, then your opponent gains 1000 life points. Where a card can miss timing is if the last action to have occurred is not the action that makes the card meet its activation requirements. So in the case of Dupe Frog, it gets destroyed by Soul Taker, then the controller of Dupe Frog gains 1000 life points. In this case, the last action to have occurred is the controller of the Dupe Frog gaining 1000 life points and not the Dupe Frog being sent from the field to the graveyard. So in this case, because it's an optional when trigger effect, it will not be able to activate because the last action isn't the action that made the Dupe Frog meet its trigger. In the case of like something like linking off the Dupe Frog, if you link it off, the Dupe Frog is considered sent to the graveyard and then the link summon performed. In this case, the link summon is the last action to have occurred and not the Dupe Frog being sent from the field to the graveyard. So as you can see, this is basically the way that you would know whether or not a card or effect misses timing. It's specifically when you have an optional when trigger effect, it needs to meet its trigger as the last action to have occurred in the previous chain for it to be allowed to activate. Alright, this next ruling question comes to us from Halo Master, and they ask, "Hey Coder, if my opponent controls an effect monster and I have Drytron Alpha Thuban and Applicable Tribute and Forbidden Droplet in my hand, if I activate the Alpha, my opponent responds with a monster effect and I then droplets their monster by sending the Alpha as cost, does the Alpha still resolve?" So in this case, Drytron Alpha Thuban has an effect where it can tribute another Drytron monster or a ritual in order to special summon itself from the hand or the graveyard. In this case, if you activate the Alpha in your hand and then you use the droplet and you discard that same Alpha that you activated in your hand, it will not be able to special summon itself because Alpha specifically reads that it special summons this card. And the reason why that is important is because if the Alpha, by the time in between it activated and when it resolves, moves location, so if it goes from the hand to the graveyard, it's not considered to be the same card. So it is no longer this card for the application of the effect of the Drytron Alpha Thuban. So in this case, it will not be able to special summon itself from the graveyard. When the Alpha would resolve, it'll simply resolve without effect. Okay, this last ruling question comes to us from Talking Like Nerds, and they ask, ruling question, if I control Dark Samorg and a wind or a dark monster, and my opponent uses Goes and Match, what happens because Dark Samorg counts as wind and dark? So this is a really interesting and neat interaction. Under Goes and Match, Dark Samorg can literally never remain on the field. Say, for example, the only monster you would have in your hand is the Dark Samorg and your opponent has a face-up Goes and Match. If you would special summon or normal summon your Dark Samorg by any means, you would legally be allowed to do that. So say you have no monster on your field and you activate an effect that would special summon Dark Samorg from your hand, the Dark Samorg will be summoned, but when you need to resolve the effect of the Goes and Match in order to control only one attribute, there is no way that you can keep the Dark Samorg on your field while still respecting the Goes and Match. So in this case, the Dark Samorg will simply send itself from the field to the graveyard, even if you don't control any other monsters. So the fact that you control a dark or a wind monster will not change anything. The Dark Samorg is never allowed to exist on the field while there is a Goes and Match face up. So anyways, guys, that's it it for this episode of Know Your Rulings. I hope you guys learned something new, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and leave your ruling questions in the comment section of this video so I can go over those for the rulings of the next video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good one, guys. Peace.